As an online CCG, there are certain advantages afforded to you by that format, and one of them is having complete control over the game mechanics and card interactions. For example, I can't be the only one who remembers knowingly misusing card effects in Yu-Gi-Oh! Back on the playground. But since Hearthstone's system automatically handles those things, it's a lot more forgiving to newcomers, to the eternal sorrow of us schoolyard bullies. But more than just being able to control the system to make things easier and more fair, you can also use it to balance things that end up playing differently in the wild than they did in your testing. Going back to Yu-Gi-Oh!, these days, it's not uncommon for someone to win during the first few turns, because the meta is so completely out of control. But that's because Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a, mostly, physical card game, and you can't roll out a patch to millions of pieces of laminated paper. The same is not true, however, of online card games. So one of Hearthstone's biggest strengths, then, is its ability to change anything at any time. Like, what? So this card's overpowered in the current meta? Well, let's change it. Oh, our change didn't work? Well, let's change it again. And again. And again. And again. Until it works. That's a luxury that Blizzard has, but they never do it, and that pisses me off. They've tossed around bullshit explanations in the past like, oh, we want the player base to come up with organic solutions to these obviously mathematically provably broken cards. Personally though, I'm of the mind that the actual reason they don't do it is because they view nerfing a card as admitting defeat. Like, we're Blizzard, we can't possibly have fucked something up. And nowhere is that better exemplified than the story of the Patron Warrior. So, what was the Patron Warrior deck? Basically, the Patron deck first came into existence when the Blackrock Mountain adventure appeared, and introduced a few new cards to the game, the main one being the titular Grim Patron. The Grim Patron is a 5-cost 3/3 that whenever he takes damage, summons another 3/3 Grim Patron. Well, that was the catalyst that caused this deck to work, but honestly, every card in the deck is just as important and vital to it working properly. I'll get into more specifics later, but the general idea of the deck was to use self-harming cards and abilities to create clones of the Grim Patron, which could then be used in turn to buff up other cards. And this deck ruled the latter for a solid year. So why was the Patron deck so popular? Well, first and foremost, it was incredibly cheap. Hearthstone is the kind of game that can very easily devolve into a contest of whoever dropped the most money on the game wins the match automatically. And the Patron deck was one of the few decks that could be made by almost anyone for barely anything. Using one of the popular templates of the time as an example, 1/3 of the deck consists of cards that every player has by default, and on top of that, 13 common cards, 6 rare cards, 0 epics, and only 1 legendary, which by the way was a guaranteed drop in the Blackrock Mountain adventure. So basically you could start playing the game, drop $30 and have this deck an hour later. Now, that's not to say you couldn't build a more expensive version of the Patron deck, like for example adding a legendary like Grommash Hellscream, but the point is, it wasn't necessary for the deck to work. Meanwhile, I can mosey on down to Hearthstone, click on top rated decks this month, and the top one, which advertises itself as cheap by the way, has 10 free cards, 10 commons, 2 rares, 5 epics, and a non-guaranteeable legendary. Its base dust cost is almost twice as much as the Patron deck. So Patron's cheapness went hand in hand with its ubiquity, but the main thing that gave it staying power was its strength. Patron Warrior could very easily hold its own against the usual titans of the meta, like Face Hunter and Zulok, because of its massive AoE abilities. But the real power of the deck, and this was the controversial bit, was its one-hit kill potential. The goal of most Grim Patron decks was to survive the early game, make it to the late game, and drop shit tons of charge monsters in a single turn. And this deck could easily dish out 50 to 70 damage or more in a single turn with the right cards. A great example of this was a tournament match, wherein this warrior, with 0 cards left in his deck and nothing on the board, takes down a priest who had 45 health with just the 6 cards in his hand. And what did the commenter say after the match was done?
He actually missed some damage.
Yeah, the deck was insane. But that actually segues perfectly into what I love about this deck. That quote, "he actually missed some damage," is very telling. Patron Warrior was a deck with an incredibly high skill ceiling. Even that pro Hearthstone player who won in a single turn could have potentially done more with it. And that's really the amazing thing about the Patron Warrior, is that there was so much depth and complexity to playing it. I mean, look at your typical Hearthstone meta deck, Face Hunter of course being the prime example. Your strategy is to play minions, ignore everything the opponent does, and just hit his face until you win. It's a deck so dirt simple that it was the go-to for literal robots to play and win with. But meanwhile, the Patron deck had so much complexity, it was insane. Keep in mind, the deck relies on hurting your own minions to power them up. So if you miscalculated something, you could very easily end up accidentally killing all your own shit and basically losing the game for yourself. But even on a less extreme level, if you sucked at playing the deck, you would generally lose with it. A lot. It was a hard deck to play, one of the few, and for strategy nerds like me, that was a dream come true. It also had basically 0 RNG in it. The only real random element of the deck was card draw, and that deck came jam-packed with so many cards that caused card draw that you basically went through your entire deck every match, making that too a moot point. Every card in the deck worked in a reliable way. So when you won with it, it was a personal accomplishment instead of just getting lucky. Patron was also a born aggro deterrence. Because rush face decks rely on lots of low health minions, and Patron's whole thing is constant AoE damage everywhere, the deck mercilessly stepped on rush aggro at every turn. The analogy that I've always liked is that rush aggro decks are flies and Patron decks were like spiders. So in the hands of a master, Patron Warrior laughed at the hated Face Hunter, and could easily go toe-to-toe with any other deck on the ladder. It felt like you actually had to be good at the game to play Patron Warrior, and it felt like the game really rewarded that. Unfortunately, it might have rewarded that a bit too well. The problem. While the Patron deck did act like spiders, removing unwanted pests from the game, they were also 50-foot spiders, which, however helpful they may be, you'd probably be uncomfortable having around your house. The problem with Patron Warrior is often flatly blamed on its burst potential, but more specifically, it was how relatively easy that burst potential was to rely on. I mean, there are other combos in Hearthstone that allow you to do theoretically infinite damage to the opponent, but the difference is they are much harder to set up, to the point where they basically never happen in a real-world match. Whereas, a skilled player could reliably pull out Patron's strength almost every game. The funny thing is, the problem wasn't even in the deck's namesake, the Grim Patron. Yeah, they could do quite a bit of damage if left unchecked, but the real punch of the deck was the Frothing Berserker. Basically, the Frothing Berserker is a card that gains attack power every time a minion on the board gets hurt. So when combined with cards like the Grim Patron, a card that could perpetually clone itself and suicide bomb into things, it could power up the Frothing Berserker substantially. However, none of that would have even been possible without the third card in this holy trinity. If we imagine these cards as the pieces of a gun, the Frothing Berserker was the bullet itself, and the Grim Patron was the blast powder. But a bullet and blast powder are useless without the actual firing mechanism to make them interact, which in this case was the Warsong Commander. The Warsong Commander was a card that gave any minion with 3 attack or less the charge ability, which let it attack on the same turn that it was played. So since the Grim Patron had 3 attack and the Frothing Berserker had 2 attack, both were granted charge, and you could combo them from there with the Warsong Commander to dish out insane amounts of damage in a single turn, which the opponent had no chance to react to. And had no chance to react to is really the main thing here. The reason cards with 10 billion attack aren't really a huge issue in something like Yu-Gi-Oh! Is because of the existence of trap cards, i.e. cards you can activate during your opponent's turn to potentially stop what they're doing. Sure, you can build a deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! About powering up a single monster with 8,000 attack points, but all it takes is a single Mirror Force for you to instantly lose. But Hearthstone, however, doesn't have any such mechanics. There's pretty much no way for you to actively affect the game while it's your opponent's turn, so something like Patron Warrior is a much bigger problem in Hearthstone than it would be in any other game. But unfortunately, completely upending the very structure of the game itself wasn't on the solution table. So in light of that, pretty much everyone agreed that yes, while Patron was a great deck, it needed to be taken down a peg or two at least. To go back to that earlier analogy, what Blizzard needed to do was reduce the giant 50-foot spiders into convenient house-sized spiders, still perfectly adept at catching flies, but with hopefully less child eating, which, in game terms, equates to some slight changes here and there to make things a bit more fair and reduce its overall potential for burst damage. But then Blizzard fucking nuked them instead. The Nerf. So we have a problem. Patron Warrior's burst potential is too high. How do we fix it? Well, the community had lots of discussions about that. For example, one of the more popular ideas was to make Warsong Commander's effect, minions with 3 attack have charge, an aura. That way, if a creature like Frothing Berserker was buffed up beyond 3 attack, it would lose that charge ability. Others suggested that that was just tiptoeing around the actual problem, the Frothing Berserker, and that he should be nerfed in some way instead. Another go-to fix was Emperor Thorazon, a card that can reduce the mana cost of other cards in your hand, which was essential for some of Patron's one-hit combos. The point is, people debated back and forth about the best way to nerf Patron Warrior without completely killing it. And then Blizzard completely killed it. So after a solid year of Patron Warrior going unchecked, Blizzard finally got off their fucking asses and did something about it. And what did they do? They made Warsong Commander literally the single worst card in the entire game, completely killing the deck forever. Seriously, Warsong Commander went from a 3-cost with whenever you summon a minion with 3 or less attack, give it charge, to a 3-cost with your charge minions have +1 attack. This makes it objectively worse than Raid Leader, a 3-cost card with your other minions have +1 attack. So, whereas he gives a flat buff to everything, Warsong Commander's effect only applies to charge minions. So, literally the worst card in the game. You know, I called this the card being nuked, but nuked doesn't do it justice. It's more like Blizzard used Exterminatus on it from orbit, completely atomizing it and everything around it. And thus, here lies Patron Warrior. So what happened? Well, imagine all the spiders just disappeared from the world. What would happen then? The answer is, of course, an explosion in the fly population. With their natural predator nuked into oblivion, face hunters and Zulocks were once again free to roam the lands, mindlessly face-rolling their way across the ladder. But it wasn't just them being cancerous this time. With the launch of the Grand Tournament expansion, another cancerous, incredibly overpowered deck had developed, the Secret Paladin. I don't want to get into them because this video is already overlong, but all you need to know is that they're just as cancerous and brain-dead to play as any other face deck, but about twice as strong. Now, a well-played Patron deck had previously been able to hold its own against it and sort of keep those decks in check, but with their removal, Secret Paladin ruled the ladder now unchallenged. I stopped playing Hearthstone shortly after Whispers of the Old Gods launched, so I don't know if they're still around, but evidence seems to point to them having been abandoned in favor of newer, overpowered, skillless decks, So, you know, the more things change, the more they stay the same and all that. And even though I didn't really quit the game until a few months after the Patron nerf, I think that was really the catalyst that caused my mood towards Hearthstone to turn so sour. Just everything about the situation was completely mishandled. Patron Warrior was a fantastic deck with an incredibly high skill ceiling, the kind of deck not seen before or since in Hearthstone. And after sitting around with their thumbs jammed firmly up their asses for over a year, Blizzard finally did something about it when they realized the problem wasn't going to magically fix itself. And when they finally did something, it was a complete overreaction that killed the best thing to ever happen to the game. And the rise and subsequent dominance of Secret Paladin among many other cancerous decks has basically sealed the game's fate in my eyes, and nothing that I've heard about it since has made me want to come back. You know, the more I write, the more I realize this video is basically the prequel to my Feria video. For those of you who haven't seen it, you really need to, especially if you like the strategic depth you got from playing Patron Warrior. I'll throw a card on screen for it now, but the gist is that Feria has been my solution to the mess that Hearthstone has become. It's a genuinely fantastic CCG that's really cheap to get into, has fucking incredible art, little to no RNG, a small but very active community, and where every deck has a high skill ceiling, not just the one. I honestly feel like I'm describing heaven to a dying Patron Warrior of Mice and Men style, but honestly, Feria is just that good. And for the record, I'm not being paid to say that, this is genuine love right here. But like I said, you should really go watch that video I did about it where I go way more in depth. So yes, sadly Patron Warrior might be dead, Rush aggro decks might reign supreme now and forever, and Hearthstone may be beyond saving at this point. But thank Christ that at the very least, we have the little clubhouse known as Feria, and everyone should get in here. Hey! So my friend, @CanesTheName on Twitter, actually edited this video, and he did a fucking great job. So go give me money at patreon.com/Psy so I can afford to give him money to edit more stuff in the future. That way he gets paid and you get more videos. It's a win-win. And finally, I want to give a very special thank you to my grim Patreon patrons, including Isaiah Christo, Sawsbucky, Forgotten Paladin, Ludwig, Mageline, Mythnut, and Soul. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Later.
Swing that nerf that round and round. One more patch, you're going down. Nerf it all right to the ground. One more patch, you're going down. Swing that nerf that round and round. One more patch, you're going down. Nerf it all right to the ground. One more patch, you're going down. That's so OP. I'm yelling Ember, and when I lose